further ado, please welcome our friend John Q from the Atlantic Highlands, who will be sharing on the third tradition.
Hi, everyone. My name is John. I'm an alcoholic. And as Danielle just told you, I'm a proud member of the Atlantic Highlands by the Book group, and happy to see several of my fellow group members here. It's always a privilege to be asked to do anything in AA, but I'm finding this a particularly quite an enormous privilege to be asked to speak in front of my peers. District 24 is my home district in AA, and many of them are here today. So I hope I don't disappoint. I mean, I've given some thought into what I want to say. I've actually written down several things I want to say, which is unusual for me because but before I start, I want to give you my email address because I suspect that you may want to receive a copy of a document, one of the documents I'm going to be referring to, and it's not readily available. So just take your pen out and just jot down my email address. It's jjmq42@gmail.com. So again, jjmq42@gmail.com. All right, so my sobriety date is December the 1st, 1977. And I'm a very lucky man. I've been blessed to be a member of our fellowship for, I guess it's 43 years now, and extremely lucky to have found you when I did, and extremely lucky to have met the people I've met over the years who have guided me and helped me in my trials and turmoils, and here I am today, a sober member, and I've never wavered from AA. I mean, that's one thing I can say. I've never once wavered from the program of recovery that you've given me. And incidentally, on December the 1st, my sobriety date, if you take a look at the Daily Reflections book, the Daily Reflections passage for that day was written by a very good friend of mine who passed away several years ago, Jay Cam, who was a delegate from Maine and also our Northeast Regional Trustee. And he talks about the 12 steps are suggested, just like it's suggested that you pull the ripcord when you jump out of an airplane. And, I kind of feel the same way about our traditions. There are no rules, there's lots of freedom in Alcoholics Anonymous, but, at the end of the day, non-adherence to our traditions can be devastating. I'm going to be saying a lot of things today that some of you may agree with, some of you may disagree with, but that's the beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous. We don't always have to be in total agreement with what we hear. But I think it's important, it's very important that you all are here. There's 58 people on this meeting right now. Some of you are from out of state. And I think it's important that the traditions are looked at, they're studied, and they're passed along and discussed. When I got sober, we did not have any big book meetings. There were none in existence. We had mostly open speaker meetings, and we had a few discussion meetings, and then we had a few 12 and 12 meetings. And once a month, when the 12 and 12 meeting would venture into a tradition, you knew you could always get a seat in the room because it was half empty. People would just run to an open meeting. They didn't want to hear about those traditions. And, that's unfortunate, but they're vital. The traditions are now 71 years old. Our fellowship is, 15 years older than that. So we struggled, we lived and did struggle for quite several years without the guidance of these traditions. And as you probably heard already in your earlier meetings, the traditions are a product of our mistakes, our errors, our fears. And it wasn't they weren't written down on day one and said, hey, these are all great ideas, let's follow them. That's not what happened. And every tradition has its own story. And before I get into tradition 3, I do want to talk about the traditions in general. Bill started writing. First, I'd like to read just a very brief paragraph that Bill wrote. And he says, "It was chiefly from correspondence and from our mounting public relations activity that the basic idea for our traditions came. In late 1945, a good AA friend suggested that all this mass of experience might be codified into a set of principles, simply stated principles, that could offer tested solutions to all of AA's problems of living and working together and of relating our society to the world outside. If we had become sure enough of where we stood on the matters, such matters as membership, group autonomy, singleness of purpose, endorsement of other enterprises, professionalism, public controversy, and anonymity in its several aspects, then such a code of principles could be written. Such a traditional code could not, of course, ever become rule or law, but it could act as a sure guide for our trustees, for our headquarters people, and for most especially for AA groups with bad growing pains." And just to further introduce myself, I know there's a lot of people on here I don't know. I told you how long I've been sober, but I've also been very privileged to have been involved in the service structure of AA from just about the beginning of my sobriety, particularly at a time when we didn't have a service structure. There was a time when we didn't have districts and we didn't have GSRs going to assemblies. And so I was privileged to be involved in that process, and very privileged to have been elected the delegate from Northern New Jersey. I was a panel 35 delegate, which means I served in 1985 and 1986. And then 3 years later at the 1989 conference, I was elected to the General Service Board, and I served in that capacity for 4 years as trustee at large, United States. So I am a very, very fortunate man. And today, I have the highest position in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a member of the Atlantic Highlands by the Book Group. And I am a member of the Atlantic Highlands by the Book Group. I participate in business meetings. And, I'm thrilled, and I'm sure that your home groups have the same experience. I'm looking at just a few. I know there's 59 people here, but I'm looking at the Hollywood Squares in front of me right now, which is 25 people. And I'm looking at the faces of a few of my fellow group members who I've seen blossom from the first day they walked into a meeting, and now they're involved in our service structure beyond the home group. And it just astonishes me and just blows me away that this is what's happening inside Alcoholics Anonymous. So Bill went around and, first thing he did was he put down the ideas for the traditions in writing, and he submitted articles to the Grapevine. And the Grapevine was his way of communicating with the groups. It wasn't the meeting in print that we are accustomed to today. It was Bill's vehicle to communicate with the fellowship. And we didn't have internet back then. We didn't have TV. We didn't have social media. We didn't have any of that stuff. So that's how Bill communicated the traditions. And he wrote this following passage just to show you the reception that he had, because quite frankly, many groups weren't interested in him. They just didn't want to hear about him. And he wrote down that this is what somebody said to him once: "Bill, we'd love to have you come and speak. Do tell us where you used to hide your bottles and all about that big hot flash spiritual experience of yours. But for heaven's sakes, please don't talk anymore about those blasted traditions." And that's what he encountered. That's what he encountered. But time passed, and in 1950 at the International Convention in Cleveland, they were adopted by our fellowship. And this is approximately 5 years after the idea was given to him to try to put something in writing that would eventually become our 12 traditions. So I do want to talk about the traditions in general before I talk about the third tradition. Just some overviews of them. They've been around for 71 years. Can they ever be changed? And the answer is yes. The steps can be changed, the traditions can be changed, the 12th concept can be changed, but it's almost impossible to change them. And there was an attempt made a couple of years ago. Some of you I know some of you know this, but some of you maybe never heard this. The 11th tradition, which states we need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. What words are missing in that tradition? You know, some of the new members say social media, but there's another omission that's been glaring: television. Television was never put into that tradition because in 1950, I don't know how many, I know maybe one or two of you were around in 1950, but I do remember my first television set, and my parents got my first TV set in 1951. TV was not what we have today. So I suspect that when Bill wrote the traditions, TV was not in his thought process. So a couple of years ago, some recommendations were made to change the 11th tradition to include words like TV, social media, and all of the other outlets that could be used to break anonymity at the public level. So it went to our General Service Conference, to the Public Information Committee, if I recall correctly. And quite frankly, the Public Relations Committee, the Public Information Committee rather, killed it. They basically killed it and said there is enough spiritual content in the verbiage of the tradition to include everything that's possibly considered public level, that we do not need to be specific about what the tradition should apply to. But had our conference decided to make a change to the tradition, it would not have stopped there, because the process to change a tradition, a step, or the 12th concept, there's a procedure, and the procedure, it's not been tested to see how well it will work, but I'll tell you what it is. We would need to send out a communique to all the registered groups in the world, and I'll repeat that, the world. And they would have 6 months within which to decide whether or not we should or should not change a tradition, a step, or the warranties. And 3/4 of the responding groups would have to vote in the affirmative for that to happen. So I don't see in our lifetime, or quite frankly, lifetimes well after us, that this is going to happen. I don't know, but you never know. So they can be changed. But who enforces the traditions? The AA. There's no AA police department. Okay, there's none. I'm looking at 59 people who are the enforcers of the traditions. Every AA group member should be an enforcer of the tradition. Now, I'm going to talk in a few minutes between total apathy, the differences between total apathy and rigidity. What's the balance? When do we say something? When do we wait? How do we practice acceptance and patience and tolerance? I'll give you some examples. But the traditions, there's no AA police. It's completely up to us. The General Service Office does not make tradition decisions. And, they are always inundated with letters from groups asking them to be the referee and decide who's right. And the group members will write in with examples and say, this one did this and this one said that. Who's right and who's wrong? You'll never get an answer from General Service Office saying who's right or who's wrong. What they will do is send out a letter with shared experience. That's all you'll get from them. You won't get an answer. And they will basically leave it up to you with the group conscience. I mean, the beauty of AA, there's a lot of things beautiful about AA, but I think the informed group conscience is paramount in how we deliberate and how we solve tradition issues and how we deal with other matters. But then there's tradition violations, so to speak, that the General Service Office needs to be involved in. I mean, you all read, I used to say the papers, but papers are becoming a dinosaur. We all look at the internet. We all look at the news. We all look at the news on the internet. And I dare say there isn't a week that goes by. I mean, I do a Google search on Alcoholics Anonymous. I do a Google search on my sports teams that I follow just to see what's in the press. And I dare say there's not a week that goes by that somebody is not breaking their anonymity at the public level. So how does AA deal with that? Well, in that case, the General Service Office will send a little note to the area delegate. I got them when I was a delegate. I'm sure Jeff got one or two while he was delegate. And Jay's on here too. Jay, I'm sure and what we're expected to do when we're the area delegates is to do something. Perhaps contact the individual since they live in our neck of the woods and maybe have a conversation with them. In the meantime, the General Service Office will send a reminder to the news outlet, the newspaper, whoever it was that broke the story, reminding them of our tradition about anonymity at the public level. But they're not bound to follow our traditions. We're just giving them that for information, and and we're basically saying, please, this is our tradition. Respect it if you want, but we can't force you to. But other than that, who enforces the traditions? And so I'm going to read now. I'm going to read a little excerpt from a talk that was given in 1986. And before I do that, I'm going to preface my remarks by saying, are any of the traditions in black and white, or is there a middle ground? And I think everybody has to decide themselves before they say, this person's violating this tradition, this person's not, you have to look at the facts, you have to look at the circumstances. And as I said a few minutes ago, when do we exercise patience and tolerance before we jump on a poor AA member for doing something incorrectly? And there's a dilemma about when we dig our heels in and become rigid, or when we become totally apathetic about a tradition violation. So I'd like to read an excerpt of a talk that a past General Service trustee and a past General Manager, Bob Pearson, wrote in 1986. And I was there when he delivered this talk. So it's in the 1986 conference report if you want to see it, and if you don't want to go that far and would like a copy of it, I can send it to you by email. So I'm not going to read his whole report, his whole talk, but the title of it is Our Greatest Danger, Rigidity. And he goes on to say, let me offer my thoughts about AA's future. I have no truck with those bleeding deacons who decry every change and view the state of the fellowship with pessimism and alarm. On the contrary, from my nearly quarter-century's perspective, I see AA as larger, healthier, more dynamic, faster growing, more global, more service-minded, more back to basics, more spiritual than when I came through the doors of my first meeting in Greenwich, Connecticut. AA has flourished beyond the wildest dreams of the founding members, though not perhaps of Bill himself, because he was truly visionary. I echo those who feel that if this fellowship ever falters or fails, it will not be because of any outside cause. No, it will not be because of treatment centers or professionals in the field, or non-conference approved literature, or young people, or the dually addicted, or even the druggies trying to come to our closed meetings. If we stick close to our traditions, concepts, and warranties, and if we keep an open mind and an open heart, we can deal with those and any other problems that we ever have or will have. If we ever falter and fail, it'll simply be because of us. It will be because we can't control our own egos and get along well enough with each other. It will be because we have too much fear and rigidity and not enough trust and common sense. If you were to ask me what is the greatest danger facing AA today, I would answer the growing rigidity, the increasing demand for absolute answers to our nitpicking questions, pressure for GSO to enforce our traditions, screening alcoholics at closed meetings, prohibiting non-conference approved literature, banning books, laying more and more rules on groups and members. And in this trend towards rigidity, we are drifting farther and farther away from our co-founders. Bill in particular must be spinning in his grave, for he was perhaps the most permissive person I've ever met. One of his favorite sayings was, every group has the right to be wrong. He was maddeningly tolerant of his critics, and he had absolute faith that faults in AA would be self-correcting. I don't disagree with many of the things that Bob has said, but I have my own opinion on when do we stop being apathetic and say something? What's the point? I mean, at what point do we say, hey, let's look at that? And again, every circumstance has its own parameters, its own answer. But I think it's up to us as members to decide in the long run, balance this and just find the middle ground, or maybe the extreme if that's the pleasure that you have, and see where we go with it. I think solutions to this dilemma between total apathy and total rigidity, good sponsorship and good sponsorship is a key to me for a lot of things. A lot of people. I mean, the more equipped sponsors are, the better the health of our fellowship going forward. I mean, I hate to say this, but I know men and women in AA who, let's say, I would not want to practice their brand of sobriety, but I see where they got their brand of sobriety from when I talk to their sponsors. So, I mean, good sponsorship is key in this whole thing. So, all right, let's get into tradition 3. All right. And I'm going to talk about, after I talk about the traditions themselves, I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 topics. 1, membership. 2, identification. 3, groups that are not practicing the traditions. And I'm going to talk about a document that I'm going to share with you, and then I'm going to go through the traditions checklist, the questions that are in that document. So the short form, which was read earlier, the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. Full stop. The only requirement. But I'm going to talk in a few minutes about membership and are there implied requirements. The long form, excuse me. Our membership ought to include all who suffer from alcoholism. Hence, we may refuse none who wish to recover, nor ought AA membership ever depend upon money or conformity. Any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as a group, they have no other affiliation. So the long form of the tradition introduces another component to the tradition in writing, and that's what is an AA group? And he's just explained it. And before I get into the topics that I just mentioned, I also want to read or introduce a third element to the third tradition, which is not discussed very much, but Bill wrote about it in 1948 in a Grapevine article, which appears on page 80 in Language of the Heart. And it has a very practical application today. It's on page 79. I'm not reading the whole thing, but it's an article in the on Tradition 3, which was in the Grapevine in February 1948. So he's talking about Tradition 3, and he goes on to say, our membership tradition does contain, however, one vitally important qualification. That qualification relates to the use of our name, Alcoholics Anonymous. The use of our name, something we don't talk about very much these days, but there's a practical issue that I do want you to be aware of. And let me read on what he says. We believe that any 2 or 3 alcoholics gathered together for sobriety may call themselves an AA group, provided that as a group they have no other affiliation. Here our purpose is clear and unequivocal. For obvious reasons, we wish the name Alcoholics Anonymous to be used only in connection with straight AA activities. One can think of no AA member who would like, for example, to see the formation of dry AA groups, wet AA group, Republican AA groups, communist AA groups. Few, if any, would wish our groups to be designated by religious denominations. We cannot lend the AA name even directly, even indirectly, to other activities, however worthy. If we do so, we shall become hopelessly compromised and divided. We think that AA should offer its experience to the whole world for whatever use can be made of it, but not its name. Nothing can be more certain. Let us of AA therefore resolve that we shall always be inclusive and never exclusive. And that's a subject I'm talking about in a few minutes. Offering all we have save our title. May all barriers be thus leveled. May our unity thus be preserved. And may God grant us a long life and a useful one. The usage of our name. Our website, Alcoholics Anonymous, is aa.org. There is another website, and I'm not going to discuss any more about it other than to bring it to your attention. And you can look at it, and I'm going to tell you a little story about it, about what the General Service Board has done with it over the years. And it's called alcoholicsanonymous.com. Okay? So alcoholicsanonymous.com has nothing to do with Alcoholics Anonymous. But go to the website after this meeting or another time, take a look at what it says, take a look at what it purports to do. It does list our meetings, but then it goes into the health profession about detoxes and all this, things that we don't do. So in any event, a few years ago, the General Service Board or the AAWS Board, I'm not sure which one, started to write letters to this organization asking them to stop using our name. And they basically did nothing. I don't even know if they responded, but several letters were written to asking them to stop using our name. Now, my buddy, who just 2 years ago rotated off as our Northeast Regional Trustee, Richard Pertell, was adamant about this improper usage of our name. And he was really, really upset with the fact that we didn't launch a lawsuit to stop them from using our name. But the timing was all poor because at that time we had already launched a lawsuit about the manuscript issue. And some of you may remember that, and I'm not going to go into it if you don't remember it, but and that was not a very popular, it was not a unanimously popular decision that the General Service Board took at the time. In fact, there was a lot of flack raised by membership about it. And all right, so it was a contentious issue, and I'm not going to go into the merits as to whether it's right or wrong. They shouldn't have done it, should have done it. That's not the issue. The point is that it was decided at that time that, well, we're not just going to, we don't want to have another lawsuit. And the General Service Board just backed off. But here we have somebody using our name, and to my knowledge, today we're not doing anything about it. But that, again, you can take a look at that yourself. But let's take a look at the history of Tradition 3. And I'm going to read from the 12 and 12 for a second, just to, if I can, because what better way of describing our history about that particular issue than the words of our co-founder. So he writes on page 140 of my version. I have one of these old versions that even has the circle and triangle on it, something we no longer use. But he writes, we were resolved to admit nobody to AA but the hypothetical class of people we term pure alcoholics. There was an awful lot of fear at the time by the AA members. Fear about their own sobriety. What are we going to do if we let in other types of people? And other types of people, Bill used some words that some people would find offensive today, but these are the words he used at the time. And there was, let me just go on reading. Except for their guzzling, the unfortunate results thereof, there could be no other complications. So, beggars, tramps, asylum inmates, prisoners, queers, plain crackpots, and fallen women were definitely out. Yes, sir, we'll cater only to the pure and respectable alcoholics. Any others would truly destroy us. Besides, if we took in the odd ones, what would decent people say about us? We built a fine mesh fence right around AA. He goes on to say, but why did AA finally drop all its membership regulations? Why did we leave it to each newcomer to decide himself whether he was an alcoholic and whether he should join us? Why did we dare to say, contrary to the experience of society and government everywhere, that we would neither punish nor deprive any AA of membership, that we must never compel anyone to pay anything, believe anything, or conform to anything? The answer, now seen in tradition 3, was simplicity itself. At last, experience taught us that to take away any alcoholic's full chance was sometimes to pronounce his death sentence, and often to condemn him to endless misery. Who dared to be judge, jury, and executioner of his own sick brother? As group after group saw these possibilities, they finally abandoned all membership regulations. One dramatic experience after another clinched this determination until it became our universal tradition. And, prior to this happening, the General Service Office had gone out and asked groups to refer or tell us what your membership requirements are. And the list, I've never seen the list, but I can only imagine. And quite frankly, I would be embarrassed to even know what they were today, because I believe we should be open to everyone and anyone who needs our help. We have a pledge that we say at service meetings in particular, and I'm going to repeat it if you've not heard it. And it says, I am responsible when anyone, anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. And, that's our mantra today. So, for us to even think of telling a person because they're not the right political party, or their ethnicity is different from ours, or their sexual orientation is different, that's insane. It's absolutely insane. But that's what we had. That's what we had. And thank God, that the General Service Office went out and got this shared experience. And thank God the members at that time were maybe they had enough sobriety to realize that we can't do that. And today, that's true. We cannot do that. We cannot turn our backs on anyone who wants our help, nor should we. There are people in AA, I'm going to admit it, there are some people in AA I would not want to have a cup of coffee with at the diner after a meeting. I'll put it to you that way. But I'll tell you, there is not one person in AA who would ask me for their help that I would not sit down and talk to them. Not one. Not one. And I think that's the attitude. I'm happy I have that attitude. I don't have to like everybody. And like I said, there are some people I would not want to break bread with them or have a cup of coffee. But man, if the chips are down and they're hurting and there's anything I can do to help, I will be the first one in line. So, all right, let's talk about AA membership. And one of my mentors in the beginning, and I've had many, one of my mentors was a man who actually eventually became my sponsee and just passed away a few months ago, Stan B., who was our delegate in 1981 to 82. And he's largely responsible for me getting involved in service and well, what he used to say about membership. And I'm going to it's a hypothetical, well, not a hypothetical, it's a rhetorical question. Do I want to be the type of AA member that now, and my example is pre-COVID. So do I want to be the type of AA member that goes into my meeting room, gets a cup of coffee that somebody else made, sits down in a chair that somebody else set up, listens to a speaker that somebody else booked, and then leaves the meeting afterwards without thanking the speaker and does nothing else for the group? Do I want to be that kind of member? Well, no, I don't. I certainly don't. I think membership has some degree of responsibility. After all, we are there to help. Our 5th tradition gives us our marching orders. Each group has but one primary purpose: to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. That doesn't only mean the alcoholic who's in the room at that meeting. It means alcoholics who are not in the room. That's why I encourage group members to get involved in service. But I understand that some members don't have the time for either personal reasons or whatever. But I also know some members who don't want to have the time. I hate to say that. And but I'm not their higher power. In fact, I'm nobody's higher power. I can only do what I think I need to do and encourage others about the joy of doing the things that I and others and I've been taught to do, and let the cards fall where they are. So I have no right to chastise anybody for doing what they don't do. But what about permissiveness in this? I mean, what about AA members that 13th step? What's our obligation? I mean, some people believe in live and let live. I'll give you a stupid example. I was at a meeting. Actually, it was Stan's meeting. This is a couple of years ago, the Sayreville Victories Group, and I was sitting towards the middle of the room. And if any of you have ever been there, those in New Jersey, it's a fairly large room. And there were a bunch of people off to one side who wouldn't shut up during the whole meeting. They just talked. I mean, and you could hear them. And a couple of the group members were sitting near the speakers, or sitting near these people that were talking during the meeting. And I walked over to a few of them after the meeting, and I said, "Did you hear those guys talking?" They said, "Oh, yeah, yeah." I said, "Why didn't you turn around and ask them to be quiet?" And they said, "Oh, no, live and let live." I said, "That's not what that means." But that's what they said. So what about 13 steppers as an example? Do we live and let live, or do we have a responsibility to make our meetings a safe place? I think the latter. I think we have a responsibility to say something. What about celebrants or AA members who want to celebrate sobriety when we know they're drinking? Stupid example, but it's happened. I've encountered it. What do? Do you say, well, it's up to their conscience to do what they think is right? If it were just me and them and no newcomers, I might have a different opinion. But our meetings are loaded, hopefully, with newcomers who are impressionable. They see what they see, and they hear what they hear. And I'm always thinking about how is this going to affect the newcomer? What are they going to think if we allow? And then you get members, and I know you've all seen them. You don't see them for 8 or 9 or 10 months, and then 2 months before their anniversary, they start coming around, showing their face, and then they get up at the podium on their anniversary night, and they tell us how grateful they are for their sobriety, and then they sit down and they go home, and then you see them 10 months later. Well, again, I am not their higher power, but I am concerned when I have a newcomer next to me, and he or she's seeing this, and you say, well, what gives, So what I do in a case like that, if I have a newcomer, I just say, look, and they say, well, I don't see Bill. I haven't seen Bill at meetings. Where has he been? Well, I'll make up some story. Maybe he's busy or, goes to other meetings, whatever. But, I'll be honest with you, this kind of stuff bothers me, but I have to be patient and tolerant. I have to be patient and tolerant because, again, I am not in charge. And again, good sponsorship breeds good membership. The more active and the more proactive a sponsor is and teaches their sponsees the ropes and the traditions with a small t and a large t, I think the better off we are. We do have a responsibility. We are self-policing. We're self-perpetuating. Alcoholics Anonymous is not, we're not reliant on other people for our continuity. It's us. And we have the responsibility to carry the message. The General Service Office, our areas, our delegates, the General Service Board, they help us with that effort, but basically it falls on us. And, members who, and the other thing I'm going to talk about, and it bothers me sometimes, but I'm being brutally honest with you. When I got sober, when you had an anniversary, the only time your sponsor went up to the podium with you was at your 90 days. And back in my day, we used to give out 90-day pins, not the medallions, and that's only a detail. But somewhere along the line, we started the practice of going up to the podium with our sponsors or a friend or sometimes a family member and whatever, and getting a medallion. And sometimes I find that to be a little bit more like the old TV program, This Is Your Life, where a person gets up and starts talking about Joe, Joe's a wonderful person. And, rather than Joe just saying how grateful he is or she is, and whatever the case may be. But, we're putting AA members on pedestals sometimes, and sometimes wrongly so. Sometimes we're saying lies about the person. What a great, and I've seen it. If somebody say, well, Joe's a great AA member, he's doing this, and I have a sponsee next to me and says, who the hell is Joe? I haven't seen him in meetings in 6 months. Who is he? Yeah. So anyway, that's just my own gripe, and I just have my own opinion about that. And since I'm talking and you're listening, I'm sharing it. You don't have to agree with me. It is what it is. I mean, I used to ask my sponsor, John Sharkey, to give me my medallion every year, and I was embarrassed because he'd say all these wonderful things about me. And I really felt he'd embarrass me, but it is what it is. So membership is key, and I'm going to talk about AA membership. Another problem we have with AA membership in another segment of what I want to talk about, and I'll give you a brief introduction to it. The demographics of our society in the United States and Canada are what they are. Certain percentage of white males, certain percentage of black males, certain percentage of white females, certain percentage of Puerto Ricans, certainly blah, blah, blah. The demographics of Alcoholics Anonymous as a percentage do not represent the same demographics of our society at all. And we have major issues that I'm going to address when I come to another segment. We get that information through our membership survey, which is done every couple of years, and it's been an age-old problem. And I'll come back to that when I get to it. Let's talk about identification. So I'm looking at 25 people, and I'm going to introduce myself 4 ways. And I'd just like you to raise your physical hand when you can identify with everything I say after I identify myself. And I'm going to start with a rather lengthy identification. Hi, my name is John. I'm an alcoholic, a drug addict, a celiac, and a diabetic. How many of you? No hands raised, right? Alcoholic, drug addict, diabetic, and celiac. Okay. I'm going to narrow it down. My name is John. I'm an alcoholic, a drug addict, and a celiac. Still no hands. Okay, my name is John. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. Couple of hands. Hi, my name is John. I'm an alcoholic. Everybody. Everybody. What did I just prove to you? Well, I don't know if I proved anything, but I proved to myself that all I did in my first 3 identifications was tell you something about me that's different from you. I accented my difference. I said, I'm special because I have this problem, and by the way, I could add a few others too, and I'm sure all of you can as well. But I just demonstrated that I am a little different from you because I'm this and that. Now, I understand this identification issue is my name is John, I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. I've been hearing this for 40 years. I mean, this has been an ongoing debate. But, I was talking to a former archivist at GSO, Frank Mauser, who died a long time ago. He's a good guy. And I was sitting at a general service conference with him once, and that was one of the topics. And I said, why do people identify themselves as alcoholic? And he said, John, all they're doing is accenting their differences, when the strength of Alcoholics Anonymous is to accent our common problem and our common solution. So enough said about that. But then we come into the problems with the identification at closed meetings. Now, I've been at meetings, and I'm not going to mention the name of this particular meeting. It's in Area 44. I was at it before COVID hit, and it's a closed meeting. And I won't tell you the night because you might figure out which one it is, though I'll leave that anonymous. where they go around the room and they identify themselves. Every person identifies themselves. And this happened more than once. And the room had quite a few people, and you come across, most people would say I'm an alcoholic. Some people would say I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. And again, I don't get bent out of shape over that. I just can't get bent out of shape over that because, But then you come to a couple of people and it's here, I'm Mary and I'm a drug addict, and I'm Joe and I'm an alcoholic, and then I'm Bill and I'm a drug addict, and nobody says anything. Now, we have closed meetings for reasons. The safety in closed rooms, closed meetings. I think there's sanctuary in closed meetings where we should be able to talk and say things to people that relate to us. And I think there's some sort of responsibility that is attached to closed meetings. Now, I don't know what the proper solution is, but I'll tell you a solution. I'll tell you a couple of solutions that I've witnessed and I've heard of. There was another closed meeting, and this one I'll tell you the name. It was in Matawan on Monday night. It's a step meeting, the Matawan Slug Lifters Group. And this happened several years ago. They went around the room, introduced themselves, and it came to and you had Mary. Mary says, I'm Mary, I'm an alcoholic. And the next person said, I'm Jane and I'm with Mary. Well, somebody decided to ask the two of those people to come out into the hallway and asked the second person, said, well, are you a member of Alcoholics Anonymous? Or, the buzzword now is you have a desire to stop drinking. And she said, no, I'm just here to support her. She's new to AA and I'm here to support her. So what the person did was encourage them to go down to another meeting, which was taking place, an open speaker meeting, which was taking place right down the road in Marlborough, and go to the open speaker meeting. So my friend goes back into the room without these two women. And I guess after the meeting, he's explaining what happened. Some people come up to him and said, what happened? What happened to those two women? So he basically told them what he did. Well, don't you know he was immediately accused of throwing someone out of AA? And, now I've heard situations where in rural areas, particularly where there are no other available meetings at that time nearby, that the group will decide to make it an open meeting from that point forward and just say, okay, we're gonna and perhaps even talk about step one, just to help the newcomer. But the rigidity, I don't think. Now, same thing with identification. If I see a newcomer and they just say I'm a drug addict and that's it, I don't get bent out of shape initially at all, because a lot of people when they first come to Alcoholics Anonymous, they have no idea what their problem is. And I think we have to practice patience and tolerance and not jump on them and say, well, are you an alcoholic? And if you can't say that, you have to leave. I've seen that happen too. And that's unfortunate. I think we have to practice common sense here. And I think as we get to know the newcomer, we can get to see their problem. A very good friend of mine in another group, he had a group member who was always introducing himself as just a drug addict. And then the day came when we heard him speak at an open speaker meeting, and it was very clear to everybody that he wasn't an alcoholic and he had no problem with alcohol whatsoever. So the group and my friend approached the guy and said, maybe you should try Narcotics Anonymous. We don't think we can help you. And, we fortunately, unfortunately, however way you look at it, we have a very great reputation being be-all and cure-all to a lot of people. A lot of people think we can fix almost anything. Our 12 steps can fix almost anything, but they're the steps redefined in the verbiage of another fellowship. So, but we do get people coming to our meetings, and how they get here is not important, but they're trying to find themselves. So I think we should be patient and tolerant with our newcomers, give them a chance to breathe, give them a chance to identify, and then decide whether they are one of us or not. And if they're not one of us, encourage them or give them the help that they need to get to another place that's going to help them. I mean, I also have another friend, several of you know him. I'm not going to mention his name, but he's sober 60 years, and he's a member of both fellowships. Very active speaker. In fact, one of the guys I really like to be around. He never once at an AA meeting will talk about problem B, and at the other meeting he will not talk about his alcoholism. I mean, he separates it, and he does it well, you know. And then, you know, the age-old problem, well, what do you do when somebody doesn't identify themselves? You know, I've seen people thrown out of meetings. Well, you got to tell us you're an alcoholic. You know, that rigidity about, I don't feel that people show up at AA meetings because they have nothing better to do. You know, we might be getting Zoom bombed lately with a bunch of idiots that have nothing better to do. But in physical meetings, I don't think people show up at our meetings out of curiosity. I mean, think about it. Would you want to go to, I don't know, would you want to go to another self-help group meeting that you have absolutely no issue with just to see what's going on? I don't get it. So people don't show up here accidentally. And there's something that sparked them to come to us, and I think we should be nurturing and try to help them with with their issue and let them find themselves. Again, accenting our differences when our strength lies in our collective singular problem. That's the strength of AA. I mean, you know, many of you have heard me say this more than once. We have an incredible gift. Every one of us who's on this meeting right now have an incredible gift, and we've used that gift. You know, we've all talked to other alcoholics. It happened to me, it happened to you, and I'm here because of the kindness of 4 men 43 years ago. The kindness. And the magic was that I believed them. There was something about them that I believed, and I still believe. And we have that gift. And that's why we should be very careful how we use it, and we shouldn't throw out people just because they're not looking the right way or conforming to what we think the rules of AA are. The next topic I want to talk about is groups that constantly break the traditions. What should we do? What should anyone do? And a couple of years ago, I was talking to a local group here in New Jersey about traditions, and I made up a hypothetical example. Excuse me. And my hypothetical example was, and I'm better move this along. There's a group in your neighborhood that does everything wrong. They follow no traditions. They break every single one of them. Every single one of them. They allow members, anybody can become a member. You don't have no singleness of purpose involved. They break their anonymity all over the place. What would you do? So I asked this group that question that particular night, and most of the people started to say, well, I wouldn't go to the group. I said, okay. I said, but what about a newcomer that might wander into that group? What responsibility do we have to protect our newcomers, even if they don't go to that, if they're going to that meeting? So it began a little change of thinking about what we should do. So the consensus came to be, we should probably do or say something, but we don't know what it is. So I said, well, we do have a process, and I'll just tell you quickly what it is. Those of you who are DCMs, you would be involved in this, because what we would do is ask a DCM and a couple of GSRs to go and talk to the elders of that group, and maybe talk to them about the 12 traditions, and hopefully steer them in the right direction. I said, but then we might have a problem with the fact that they turn their thumbs up and say, no, we're going to continue to do what we do. And they call themselves the ABC AA group, just for a name, okay? And they go on, and they're doing everything wrong. They're breaking traditions, anything goes, et cetera, et cetera. And you become the area treasurer. You are now individually the area treasurer. And you get a check from the ABC group, AA group, this group that you know to be really not a real AA group by definition, or your own conclusion, because you know how they're a bunch of screw-ups and they're doing everything wrong, but you are the area treasurer and you have a check for $100 from the ABC AA group. And I asked this bodied the question. I said, what would you as the area treasurer do? And a couple of people said, oh, I'd return the check. I said, really? And a couple of more people say, oh, I'd rip it up, I'd return the check. And then I showed my true colors and I said, so I guess I'm the only one in the room that would deposit the check. And they're looking at me and say, why would you deposit the check? You just told us that they're really a bad AA group. They're screwing up, they're doing everything wrong. I said, yes, but they have said they're an AA group. Who am I to say they're not an AA group? Who are we to tell an AA member they're not an AA member? You know? And the same thing applies to a group. All we can do is carry the message and hopefully say the right things that will make them think about the danger, think about whatever, and the consequences, and step back and then you let go and let God, you know, after you've done the legwork, you know. But sometimes we have to do the legwork before we let go and let God. And I think that's our responsibility. And that's the compromise that I see in all of the issues pertaining to members and groups. Let go and let God eventually, but say what you need to say at the appropriate time. And the appropriate time is not necessarily at the beginning. It might mean, you know, getting to know the people, getting to know the group, getting to understand what they're trying to accomplish, maybe suggesting an alternative or something along those lines. So I've got 5 minutes now to tell you something that's probably going to take a little longer, but I will speed it up. So there is a document that I have shared with some of you in the past, and again, I will make it available to any of you that would like a copy of it. The General Service Board came up with a strategic plan back in February of 2016, in which they covered 3 major topics. And the 3 major topics were reaching out the hand of AA, which is what we're going to talk about. Then they talked about communication, and then they talked about money. So reaching the hand out. Now, it's a great document. Even if you want to find to see what the General Service Board does and the types of things they're concerned about, it's worth reading. I mean, and the things that they identified 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, it's almost 5 years ago, are still pertinent and still very much issues. And I started on one of them a few minutes ago, the issue with demographics, with our membership. Our membership is not representative of our population. So it's a problem. We talk about it. We try to find solutions, and I think we must continue to talk about it. We need to see more minorities inside Alcoholics Anonymous. Not only color, but religion, sexual orientation, any type of diversity. So let me read some of the pertinent points that the General Service Board wrote in this document. One, and I'm just going to read. Our focus is on helping to widen the doors of AA so that all alcoholics who want to stop drinking can have a chance to find sobriety in AA. We recognize that inclusivity goes beyond ethnicity and age. It includes gender, relation, linguistics, and any factor that may place a person in the majority or minority. One effective way to attract more people into AA is to enhance our cooperation with professionals. Enhancing our efforts in this area will help us be more inclusive, and it is an area where all AA members can help. So one of their goals was the AA fellowship will become more inclusive and accepting, and thereby AA will experience an increase in membership as more people are introduced to recovery. One of the sub-goals there was the General Service Board will contact area delegates to identify underrepresented sectors in the AA population. We've already done that. We've already done that here in Area 44. We've identified them. Now we have to find a solution to the problem. The General Service Board will suggest to AAWS that it make electronic versions of select foreign language pamphlets available online. We just, at the area committee the other day, they just elected to have a section dedicated to Polish-speaking groups in Area 44. Believe it or not, There are AA members in New Jersey. We already know we have a large Hispanic community, many of whom do not speak English, and we have a large Polish community that does not speak English. So we need to bring them into the service structure, and they need to get the same recovery and sobriety that we have here. The General Service Board and GSO will undertake a year of increased cooperation. Okay, the General Service Board will begin a conversation with basic professional degree programs accrediting bodies to incorporate information on Alcoholics Anonymous into basic education and look at possible inclusion in continuing and professional education, the medical profession being one of the largest. Our doctors are in medical school do not receive any practical training in the benefits of Alcoholics Anonymous as a resource for those of their patients who are afflicted with alcoholism. The General Service Board will undertake a collaborative effort among trustee committees to ensure that the same type of thing. Here we go. The General Service Board will develop policies to utilize new media technologies, social and others, that are in line with the traditions and allow for the maximization of raising awareness of Alcoholics Anonymous. They should also provide us with methods of communication with all who may benefit from AA's existence. That was done. General Service Board will request that AAWS reactivate the YouTube channel for PSAs and expand the use of PSAs on Hulu and other streaming devices. This is an ongoing thing with social media. You know, the old way of reaching alcoholics is gone. We have to adapt to the times, and social media and the things that are our constituents now out there, potential members, we need to go to them with our message. Remember, alcoholics membership in our membership in Alcoholics Anonymous, we are anonymous as members. Alcoholics Anonymous itself is not anonymous. We have to be out there in the forefront telling people who we are and what we do. One of the other goals was to infuse the spirit of the third tradition throughout Alcoholics Anonymous. The General Service Board will restructure forums to include sharing on the third tradition, emphasizing the inclusive nature of this tradition. And if you've ever been to regional forums, we are doing exactly that. The General Service Board will encourage more GSO sharing on the broad and inviting door created by the third tradition, including Box 459 and About AA. I mean, we have newsletters that we send out to professionals. And think about it. Where do people like us go before we get to these doors? You know, we go to our doctors, we go to the clergy, we go. So the effort is to reach all those people so that they can potentially send us to it. And the General Service Board will send a message to all groups emphasizing the importance of inclusion in AA of all who suffer from alcoholism. So this doesn't really, if you ask someone to talk about the third tradition, they may not talk about these things that I just talked about, but I think it's very important. It is part of our third tradition. It tells us who our membership is, and we need to do more work in getting the message to our potential members, all of us. And I'm going to close with my remarks with two things. One, every one of you, whether you know it or not, is a potential member of the Cooperation with the CPC Committee, Cooperation with the Professional Community Committee. Every one of you, if you care to, can tell your doctor when you go to see him or her about the fact that you no longer drink, and you can tell them why you no longer drink, and that you found recovery through the program of recovery of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there's a bunch of material that you can give your doctor, and if your doctor wants to keep you as a patient, they will take the material and hopefully read it. And one of them is a letter from John Fromson, who was a Class A trustee, meaning a non-alcoholic trustee, who happens to be a psychiatrist. He's a member of Harvard Medical School, and he wrote a beautiful letter that's on AA.org's website addressed to the healthcare professionals. So I encourage you to get a copy of that and show it to your doctor. Give it to your doctor. So I'm going to end this now with the traditions checklist. You know, every one of our 36 principles, or most of them, give me a code of conduct. I live my life, hopefully, in accordance with some of the principles that are in the certainly the third tradition, but the other traditions as well. And the traditions checklist is available from our website, aa.org, and you can take a look at, and it asks each of the members personal questions. So I'm just going to read them. There's 6, and then Andy, I'll open it up, or Danielle, whoever's moderating this. And by the way, thank you for asking me to come today. It's a privilege. I was remiss in saying that. So tradition 3, the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. Question 1, in my mind, do I prejudge some new AA members as losers? 2, is there some kind of alcoholic whom I privately do not want in my AA group? 3, do I set myself up as a judge of whether a newcomer is sincere or phony? 4, do I let language, religion, or lack of it, race, education, age, or other such things interfere with my carrying the message? 5, am I over impressed by a celebrity? I could have told you a couple of stories about that. By a doctor, a clergyman, an ex-convent, or can I just treat this new member simply and naturally as one more sick human like the rest of us? And 6, when someone turns up at an AA meeting, at AA needing information or help, even if he can't ask for it aloud, does it really matter to me what he does for a living, where he lives, what his domestic arrangements are, whether he had been in AA before, or what his other problems are? So certainly some questions to think about, and that's it. Andy, Danielle, I'm done. I'm sorry I went on so long, but I get very passionate about these things, as you probably can tell by now. So, your floor.